My God. I'm thrilled the White House called me tonight because I'm actually working on a hip-hop album. It's a concept album about the life of someone I think embodies hip-hop, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. You laugh, but it's true. He was born a penniless orphan in St. Croix of illegitimate birth, became George Washington's right-hand man, became Treasury Secretary, caught beef with every other founding father, and all on the strength of his writing. I think he embodies the word's ability to make a difference. So I'm going to be doing the first song from that tonight. I'm accompanied by Tony and Grammy-winning music director Alex Lacamoire. Anything you need to know. I'll be playing Vice President Aaron Burr, and snap along if you like. How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal diorama. She watches all the movies, from comedy to drama. From the top roll sound, and don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end, and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtake. Movies you know. Movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 349, Hamilton. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't, that wants a revelation. So listen to my declaration. Welcome to Verbal Diorama. Whether you're a brand new listener, whether you're a regular returning listener, thank you so much for being here and thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. I am so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of Hamilton. But if you are a regular returning listener, thank you so much for continuing to listen and support this podcast for as long as you have, whether that's the whole 7 years, whether that's less than that. Thank you so much for your support. It genuinely means so much to an indie podcaster who does everything by herself. This episode, kind of a little bit different. It's the first time I've done a stage show on this podcast. Now, there is a good reason why I'm doing a stage show, is because technically it is also a movie that was released in 2020. The kaiju of kaijun have been and gone. And it's time to talk about a new monster. A 250-year-old monster. Often benevolent, but sometimes the starter of wars. I am, of course, talking about the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America. A young country in the grand scheme of things, but a country that's achieved a lot in that time. 45 presidents, starting with George Washington, and his right-hand man was the $10 founding father Alexander Hamilton, an immigrant from the West Indies that changed his fortune with his incredible brain, as well as his country, but also annoyed quite a few people along the way. History didn't really remember him until Lin-Manuel Miranda picked up a biography. Here's not the trailer for Hamilton, but a word from President Barack Obama at the White House in 2016.
So, feeling a little deprived, we invited the cast to perform today because we wanted to share this incredible musical with folks who might otherwise not get the experience. And I want to thank them so much, the show's producers, for helping to bring Hamilton to the White House. Now, the truth is, though, they do owe me. Because 7 years ago, Lin-Manuel Miranda came to the White House Poetry Jam. And he took the mic and he announced that he and his musical collaborator, Alex Lacamoire, that they were going to perform a song from a hip-hop album they were working on, and I'm quoting him, about the life of somebody who embodies hip-hop, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. And so we all started laughing, but Lin-Manuel was serious. And who's laughing now? Having said that, not to take undue credit or anything, but this is definitely the room where it happened, right here. This is it, right here, on this stage. Obviously, since that time, Hamilton has become a phenomenon, a smash hit, taken Broadway by storm, captivating the entire country, winning tons of awards, turned musical haters into diehard fans. It has become a favorite in the Obama household. That was the First Lady. Hooting. Was that Grandma who did it? In fact, Hamilton, I'm pretty sure, is the only thing that Dick Cheney and I agree on. Now, I'm trying not to get carried away when my Secretary of Health and Human Services challenged me to a rap battle. I had to draw the line. But this show brings unlikely folks together. And Lin-Manuel, if you have any ideas about a show about Congress, for example. Now's your chance to help. We can use the help. There is a reason why this has become a cultural phenomenon. In Ron Chernow's extraordinary biography of Alexander Hamilton, and a great historian is here on the front row. Lin-Manuel picked up this biography at the airport for some light beach reading. But he identified a quintessentially American story. In the character of Hamilton, a striving immigrant who escaped poverty, made his way to the New World, climbed to the top by sheer force of will and pluck and determination. Lin-Manuel saw something of his own family, and every immigrant family. And in the Hamilton that Lin-Manuel and his incredible cast and crew bring to life, a man who is just like his country, young, scrappy, and hungry. We recognize the improbable story of America and the spirit that has sustained our nation for over 240 years. Now, in this telling, rap is the language of revolution. Hip-hop is the backbeat. In each brilliantly crafted song, we hear the debates that shaped our nation, and we hear the debates that are still shaping our nation. We feel the fierce youthful energy that animated the men and women of Hamilton's generation, and with a cast as diverse as America itself, including the outstandingly talented women. The show reminds us that this nation was built by more than just a few great men, and that it is an inheritance that belongs to all of us. And that's why Michelle and I wanted to bring this performance to the White House, because Hamilton is not just for people who can score a ticket to a pricey Broadway show. It is a story for all of us and about all of us.
Hamilton tells Alexander Hamilton's life in 2 acts and details, among other things, his immigrant backstory, his involvement in the American Revolutionary War as an aide-de-camp to George Washington, his marriage to Elizabeth Schuyler, his career as a lawyer and Secretary of the Treasury, and his interactions with Aaron Burr, which culminates in their duel that ends Hamilton's life. Let's run through the cast. We have Lin-Manuel Miranda as Alexander Hamilton, Leslie Odom Jr. as Aaron Burr, Philippa Sue as Eliza Hamilton, Renee Elise Goldsberry as Angelica Schuyler, Christopher Jackson as George Washington, David Diggs as Marquis de Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson, Anthony Ramos as John Lawrence and Philip Hamilton, Okirieti Oneodawan as Hercules Mulligan and James Madison, Jonathan Groff as King George III, Jasmine Cephas-Jones as Peggy Schuyler and Mariah Reynolds, and Sidney James Harcourt as Philip Schuyler and James Reynolds. Ariana DeBose also appears as part of the ensemble, playing the very real biracial Sally Hemings, a slave owned by Thomas Jefferson, as well as playing a part that's widely seen as both the bullet and the personification of death. Hamilton was written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, was directed by Thomas Kail, and was based on Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. Let's go back to the summer of 2020, only 6 years ago as the release of this episode, and yet a lifetime away. The COVID lockdowns, the anxieties before the vaccine rollouts, and a time when so many people just stayed at home. Streaming services became a lifeline, mostly for the rewatches of shows like Friends, comfort food at a time when many people were struggling, either with COVID symptoms, the loss of family and friends, or from simply the isolation of being kept at home. And it wasn't just the COVID lockdowns going on at the time either. On the 25th of May 2020, George Floyd, a 46-year-old African-American man, was murdered by 44-year-old white police officer Derek Chauvin. The officer had arrested Floyd for allegedly using counterfeit money in a shop, and while he was handcuffed and lying face down on the ground, knelt on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 45 seconds, asphyxiating him, leading to worldwide protests against police brutality and police racism. Black Lives Matter held rallies and protests, and Chauvin was arrested on the 29th of May 2020 for the murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was, coincidentally, born in Fayetteville. Fayetteville was named after the Marquis de Lafayette. 2 months after Floyd's death, Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures released Hamilton onto Disney+, mostly because of the effects of the pandemic. And when it did arrive, it was a powder keg lit by ongoing racial tensions, people being stuck at home, and the fact it was more accessible on Disney+ than had it premiered in cinemas like it was supposed to. So our story starts with Hamilton himself, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who grew up in a bilingual New York household with Puerto Rican parents that fostered an appreciation for both Broadway tunes and Latin music, an early exposure that deeply influenced his creative identity and his instinct to blend hip-hop, R&B and traditional Broadway styles. He drafted the first version of In the Heights during his sophomore year of college, while living in Wesleyan's Latino Cultural Center alongside fellow first-generation American students. For the first time, he didn't need to check part of his identity at the door, and that connection inspired him to put his community's experience on stage. In the Heights won 4 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Miranda's acceptance speech for Best Score, which he rapped, included both a nod to Stephen Sondheim and Miranda proudly pulling a Puerto Rican flag from his tuxedo. In 2008, Miranda was on holiday in Mexico when he picked up Ron Chernow's 2004 biography, Alexander Hamilton, and began reading it. Hamilton was one of the founding fathers of the United States, an instrumental promoter of the US Constitution, founder of the nation's financial system, and its first Secretary of the Treasury. Chernow began the writing process in 1998 by going through more than 22,000 pages of Hamilton's papers and archival research around the world. He described Hamilton's extensive writing by calling him the human word machine, saying he must have produced the maximum number of words that a human being can scratch out in 49 years. Over the course of his writing and research, Chernow also took the time to dive deeper into Hamilton's history. People knew him as the $10 founding father, but otherwise history didn't speak of Hamilton as much as it did of Washington or Jefferson. Chernow would say, quote, "If Washington is the father of the country and Madison the father of the Constitution, then Alexander Hamilton was surely the father of the American government," unquote. Before Miranda had finished the second chapter of the 800-page book, he began to think of Hamilton's life as a series of hip-hop songs performed by people of colour. In Hamilton's story, his difficult Caribbean childhood, his move to New York, his role in the Revolution, Miranda saw a story very similar to that of the origins of many famous rappers. It inspired him to write a rap about Hamilton. The immigrant who writes his way out of poverty narrative was structurally the same story hip-hop had been telling for decades. Miranda met with Chernow at a performance of In the Heights to sing him an early number backstage. In 2008, Chernow became a historical consultant on what would become Hamilton. Also in 2008, the 44th President of the United States was elected, which ordinarily would just be a new president. However, this president happened to be black. Historically, the first time a man of colour was given the highest seat in office of the most powerful nation on earth. While Barack Obama's election didn't inspire Hamilton, it was Obama's approval that fanned the flames. Miranda's initial title for his show was The Hamilton Mixtape. On the 12th of May 2009, the Obama administration hosted an evening of poetry, music and the spoken word at the White House. Miranda stepped onto the stage in front of the Obamas and said, quote, "I'm actually working on a hip-hop album. It's a concept album about the life of someone I think embodies hip-hop, Alexander Hamilton," unquote. He played Aaron Burr singing the lyrics to Alexander Hamilton, lyrics that hardly changed from 2009 to the musical's debut in 2015. The 4-minute performance concluded with a standing ovation led by President Obama. Miranda has since revealed that he would have rethought the whole project if that performance had bombed. But the Obamas loved it, the crowd loved it, and Miranda set out to find if anyone had done a musical based on the life of Alexander Hamilton before. They hadn't, but his life had been portrayed before on stage and screen. The 1917 Broadway play Hamilton was written by Mary P. Hamlin and George Arliss, directed by Dudley Diggs, and starred Arliss in the title role. It follows the attempts of Alexander Hamilton to establish a new financial structure for the United States following the Confederation period and the establishment of a new constitution in 1787. In 1918, the Hamilton-Reynolds affair was depicted in the silent film The Beautiful Mrs. Reynolds, directed by Arthur Ashley, and in 1931 the pre-code film Alexander Hamilton was released, based on Hamlin's play with Arliss reprising the title role, despite him being in his 60s by this point and playing Hamilton in his 20s and 30s. This time directed by John G. Adolphi and depicting Hamilton's attempts to establish a new financial structure for the United States following the Confederation period and the establishment of a new constitution, complicated by the scandal of Hamilton's extramarital affair with Maria Reynolds. Lin-Manuel Miranda took 7 years to write Hamilton, and all the locations he wrote in are listed in the special thanks on the credits for the movie version. His songwriting process was unconventional by Broadway standards. He wrote alone first, producing rough home demos of each song, essentially recording himself rapping and singing over basic tracks. These demos were then handed to Alex Lacamoire to orchestrate, arrange and release as full theatrical scores. Miranda has been clear about his compositional instinct. Hamilton got everywhere on the strength of his writing, and Miranda's favourite MCs did the same. The lyrical density of the show, the internal rhymes, the syllabic compression, the rapid-fire delivery was directly modelled on what Miranda heard in his favourite rappers. He peppered in references to the Notorious B.I.G., Mobb Deep and DMX throughout the musical, obtaining clearances so audiences understood the specific homages being paid. These weren't vague stylistic borrowings, they were deliberate, credited tributes. The core creative team for the stage musical came together fairly quickly because most of them had worked together before on In the Heights, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, director Thomas Kail, choreographer Andy Blankenbuehler, musical supervisor Alex Lacamoire, costume designer Paul Tazewell, and lighting designer Howell Binkley. Lacamoire served as Hamilton's orchestrator, arranger, musical director, conductor, and keyboard player, and also produced the Grammy-winning Cast album. His role is genuinely hard to overstate. Miranda brought the songs, Lacamoire built the sound. While Miranda was dropping references to his favourite rappers in the lyrics and the melodies, Lacamoire was crafting orchestral passages that paid tribute to everyone from the Beatles to the Beastie Boys and D'Angelo. There was also significant black involvement in the production of the 2015 Cast album recording. Amir Questlove Thompson and Tariq Blackthorpe Trotter of The Roots, the influential Philadelphia hip-hop group and house band for The Tonight Show, saw Hamilton before it came to Broadway, and they were taken with it and chose to produce the official cast album purely based on the strength of the music. Lackamore spent around a month and a half working with Questlove and Blackthorpe, recording and mixing the cast recording. Questlove's endorsement was unequivocal. He would say, quote, "To be hip-hop is much more than just rapping in the production. It's more in the attitude. A couple of years ago when the musical Fella was first out, I was amazed that something that raw, that uncut, got past the guard and actually got made. And I thought, similar to Obama, this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And then along comes Hamilton. Like, dude, finally a reason to come to Broadway. First authentic hip-hop show," unquote. Blackthorpe was interested specifically in how Hamilton could bridge generational and ideological divisions in hip-hop's audience, as well as between theatre-goers with conflicting political positions. Miranda is Puerto Rican. Hip-hop was created by black artists. A Latino man writing a show in a black art form and winning enormous acclaim for it is a question worth asking, but Miranda completely acknowledges criticisms and has consistently credited his black influences explicitly rather than obscuring them. Questlove and Blackthorpe's involvement is a genuine signal of how the hip-hop community at large received the work. It's two of the most respected figures in black American music actively choosing to attach themselves to the project. One person who was new to the team for Hamilton was David Corrins, who designed the elaborate set, which included wooden scaffolding, a wood floor, coils and lengths of rope. The most complex elements are rising walls and a double turntable, a setup that includes a ring independently orbiting around an inner rotating floor. Corrins' initial instinct for the turntable came from the show's thematic DNA. He was struck by the circular movement inherent to the show, from the literal hurricane that devastated Hamilton's homeland, to his tempestuous relationships with his political nemesis, to his cyclical relationship with Aaron Burr. The turntable physicalises both the cinematic nature of the show and the whirling nature of Hamilton's story. Corrins' historical research was meticulous. He visited both the Schuyler House in Albany and the 18th century Fraunces Tavern in Lower Manhattan. The chandelier in Hamilton's tavern scene is inspired by one he saw there. Every object on set, including quill pens and inkwells, letters, candles, and even the colour of the champagne in a ballroom scene, is historically accurate. He also considered 33 different shades of brick before settling on the right one. The brick walls actually ascend 8 feet between the first and second acts of the show. A few carefully selected props change from rifles and buckets to maps and books as the story moves from revolution to governance. The biggest design challenge was representing each of the many locations on stage without overloading the show with unnecessary scenery. Across nearly 3 hours, 30 years and 46 musical numbers, Hamilton takes its audience from interior spaces to battlefields all around New York City. Costume designer Paul Tazewell, who's featured on this podcast before for his costume work on Spielberg's West Side Story, is also part of the show's diverse creative identity, being a gay black man. Before Tazewell drew a single sketch, he and director Thomas Kail wanted to answer a fundamental question. Was this a filmic recreation of the American Revolution with period-accurate costuming, or did the contemporary sound and storytelling of the show demand something a bit more modern, street clothing, contemporary fashion? And in reality, it was a mixture of both. Tazewell collected an expansive array of images of 18th century clothing appropriate for the characters, including portraits painted of the founding fathers and their contemporaries. He also pulled contemporary fashion images that carried a style influence inspired by the 18th century while maintaining a modern sensibility, including work by John Galliano and Alexander McQueen and paintings by Kehinde Wiley. The breakthrough came during the staged reading at the Public Theatre before the off-Broadway production. Tazewell and Kail decided to simply put the cast in period costumes from the Public Theatre's extensive costume stock and see what the show felt like. The goal was to have a look that felt clean and held together, and the result was clarifying. A period silhouette felt right, but a design rule was agreed. Period from the neck down, contemporary from the neck up. And in practice, this meant no 18th century wigs. The cast wore their own hair, or hair that reflected their natural texture and contemporary styling. For Daveed Diggs as Lafayette, his hair is worn back in a ponytail, mimicking the style of the 18th century, but more modern with his curly hair. As Jefferson, his hair is released and allowed to be as explosive and fabulous as the way he plays the role. And that single design choice does enormous work. It makes the cast legible as themselves, as contemporary people, even as they inhabit 18th century silhouettes. One of the most conceptually rich details in the whole production is the neutral base for the ensemble becoming the visual metaphor of parchment, the paper that Hamilton was creating his life with. That then provided a base to which more specifically representative pieces could be added by colour and style. And it meant the ensemble members playing multiple roles could add and subtract pieces from the base, such as adding a skirt, for example. The fabric choices are all of the period, but the detailing is stripped down to make it feel more modern, with no patterns or embroidery other than for King George, who has the most elaborate and detailed costume. His over-decorated costume visually isolates himself as someone trapped in the old order as part of the British Empire. He can't move the way the rest of the cast moves, literally and figuratively. He's left behind while the new colonies flourish with independence. And the period costumes move with time. Eliza goes from a fitted bodice, which would have been popular in the 1780s, and transitions to an empire waist gown for scenes set 20 years later. Andy Blankenbuehler's choreography was so physically demanding that Tazewell had to design for extreme movement. They needed to be in coats that made them look like American soldiers. The women needed to be in ball dresses that are really just a skirt added on top of their corset. But the costume changes needed to happen seamlessly, considering how short the transitions are. Tazewell couldn't use authentic 18th century construction methods because the cast had to change in seconds, dance for 3 hours, and perform 8 shows a week. Speaking of the cast, there was no role that had a specific look or type attached to it, so casting directors were able to see people for their talent, figure out who seemed right for the different characters, and who brought them to life. The team came from a place of finding musical theatre performers they loved and seeing who could rap, and then going in the other direction and finding rappers and seeing who could sing and act. Leslie Odom Jr. was deeply attached to the material, having attended an early informal reading of the show's first act and aggressively pursued the role of Aaron Burr. Daveed Diggs could rap at a blistering pace and was invited to participate in the early Hamilton mixtape workshops, which ended him landing the roles of Lafayette and Jefferson. Philippa Sue was starring in an off-Broadway production of Natasha, Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812 when she was asked by Cale and Miranda to read for Eliza. Renee Elise Goldsberry was an established Broadway veteran from The Colour Purple and Rent, who auditioned during the workshop phase for Angelica. Jonathan Groff didn't originate the role of King George III off-Broadway. Brian Darcy James played the king at the Public Theatre, but he had other commitments, so Groff, a close friend of the creators, stepped in as a last-minute replacement for the original Broadway run. By the time Hamilton finished its wildly successful initial run at the Public Theatre in early 2015, the principal cast was cemented in place. When the show officially transferred to the Richard Rodgers Theatre on Broadway in July 2015, the off-Broadway company moved with it, except the aforementioned King George III. And the casting of King George is a deliberate exception to the casting rule. A leading cast comprised entirely of people of colour, except for the role of King George III, who is purposely played by a white man. Jonathan Groff's King George, camp, petulant, imperial, being the only white principal is not accidental. Director Thomas Cale was unambiguous about authorial intent, stating, quote, "It is essential to the storytelling of Hamilton that the principal roles which were written for non-white characters be performed by non-white actors," unquote. And it's a rule every performance of Hamilton has followed. But there is a direct criticism of the casting in Hamilton. Historian Lyra Monteiro points out that despite the predominant cast of colour, it's still white history, and that no amount of casting people of colour disguises the fact that they're erasing people of colour from the actual narrative. As I mentioned, the only character of colour in the narrative is the blink and you'll miss it inclusion of Sally Hemings, who was a slave owned by Thomas Jefferson. True fact, her brother James Hemings, who was a chef also owned by Jefferson, introduced macaroni and cheese to the US. James Hemings was eventually freed by Jefferson in 1796 after his younger brother Peter Hemings replaced him as Jefferson's enslaved chef. Sally Hemings was never freed, but her 4 surviving children, allegedly fathered by Jefferson, were all freed. In reality, thousands of people of colour participated in the Revolutionary War, either as soldiers, groomsmen or spies. Hercules Mulligan's slave, Cato, gathered intelligence through his connections as well as clients at his tailoring shop. He carried the information to Continental Army officers and other revolutionaries, including Alexander Hamilton and George Washington. Cato's messages are credited with saving Washington's life on at least 2 occasions. After the war, Cato was granted his freedom in return for his service. The lives of the people of colour who existed at the time aren't featured at all. Hamilton premiered off-Broadway on the 17th of February 2015 at the Public Theatre in Lower Manhattan, with Miranda playing the role of Alexander Hamilton, where its several-month engagement was sold out. It won 8 Drama Desk Awards, including Outstanding Musical. It then transferred to the Richard Rodgers Theatre on Broadway, opening on the 6th of August 2015, where it received uniformly positive reviews and high box office sales. At the 70th Tony Awards, Hamilton received a record-breaking 16 nominations and won 11 awards, including Best Musical. It also received the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Drama. And much of what the musical tells us is indeed true. Alexander Hamilton was born out of wedlock on the Caribbean island of Nevis around 1755 or possibly 1757, his birth year is questioned, and rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential figures in American history. He was the illegitimate son of a Scottish immigrant father and a British West Indian mother. He was raised in poverty in the Caribbean and orphaned at a young age. He was sent by sponsors to New York to receive an education in 1772 when he enrolled at King's College, which is now Columbia University. His intellectual gifts were immediately apparent, and his later contributions to the American Republic are staggering in scope for a man who died at 47 or 49. He was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention and the only original signer of the Constitution from New York. He co-wrote the Federalist Papers in support of the Constitution and became the first Secretary of the Treasury during President Washington's administration. As Secretary, he organised the National Bank, the first US monetary system, the tax system, and the Customs Service, and established the national debt. The Federalist Papers alone are an extraordinary achievement. Hamilton co-authored them along with James Madison and John Jay, writing 51 of the 85 essays himself. They remain a cornerstone of American political and constitutional thought. He was an immigrant, he came from nothing, and yet in this United States of America, he could become someone, the ultimate American dream. But the musical omits certain key information on Hamilton's very character. It portrays him as essentially abolitionist, and that reading largely follows Chernow's biography. But the historical picture is considerably more complicated. Whatever distaste of slavery Hamilton may have had, and he may very well have called out Thomas Jefferson for his slave ownership, Hamilton himself proved capable of overlooking his own personal links to the slave trade. In 1780, he married into the wealthy, slave-holding Schuyler family. General Philip Schuyler, father of Hamilton's wife Eliza, enslaved as many as 27 people. He was the largest owner of enslaved people in the city during this time. So much so that in 2020, Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan signed an executive order for the bronze statue of Schuyler outside Albany City Hall to be removed because of Schuyler's links to slavery. It was removed in 2023 and is currently in an undisclosed storage location. Research by Albany writer and historian Jesse Sir Philippi challenges the often repeated claim that Hamilton's exposure to the brutalities of slavery during his childhood on St. Croix instilled a hatred of slavery, saying no primary sources have ever been found to corroborate this. Sir Philippe's paper argues that not only did Alexander Hamilton enslave people, but his involvement in the institution of slavery was essential to his identity, both personally and professionally. Evidence from his own accounts suggests he paid $250 to his father-in-law Philip Schuyler for, quote, 2 Negro servants purchased by him for me, unquote. Hamilton was indeed a founding member of the New York Manumission Society, which advocated for the emancipation of the enslaved. However, he often acted as a legal arbiter for others in the transactions of people in bondage, meaning he was in effect a slave trader, a fact overlooked by some historians. The fact is that most of the founding fathers owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson was a slaver. George Washington and Lafayette also were. Even Abraham Lincoln, the president who abolished slavery and won the Civil War, and Ulysses S. Grant, the general who fought it, have also come under renewed scrutiny due to the ubiquitous nature of slavery during the colonial period and the early American Republic. For his part, Lin-Manuel Miranda acknowledges the criticism of his musical and that Alexander Hamilton was complicit in the system and didn't do enough to fight slavery, despite voicing anti-slavery beliefs. Miranda responded to Tracy Clayton, host of Netflix's Strong Black Legends podcast, tweets about the subject in 2020. Clayton acknowledged the complicated nature of the debate, which highlights a story told by people of colour, but focuses on real historical figures who enslaved black people or benefited from the system in some way. Her post read, quote, I really like that this conversation is happening. Hamilton, the play, and the movie were given to us in 2 different worlds, and our willingness to interrogate things in this way feels like a clear sign of change, unquote. Miranda replied, quote, all the criticisms are valid. The sheer tonnage of complexities and failings of these people I couldn't get, or wrestled with but cut. I took 6 years and fit as much as I could in a 2.5-hour musical. Did my best, it's all fair game, unquote. So Hamilton was possibly a slave owner, and he was also an adulterer, and a public one. Many powerful men had mistresses, but few openly admitted their infidelities. Hamilton's decision to publish an explainer detailing his affair with Maria Reynolds is based on a real historical event, and likely the first political sex scandal in the US. The musical quotes directly from the actual Reynolds pamphlet, with some language updated for clarity. As in the musical, the real-life Hamilton confessed to 3 men that he was guilty not of illegal financial speculation, but of paying hush money to James Reynolds, who extorted Hamilton under threat of publicising the affair with his wife Maria. But in reality, it wasn't Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr and James Madison who confronted Hamilton. It was House Speaker Frederick Muhlenberg, Representative Abraham Venable of Virginia, and future President James Monroe. Eliza Hamilton really did burn all of his letters. No one knows what she thought of his affair or the Reynolds pamphlet, but she really did remove herself from the narrative. The letters Eliza burns during Burn on stage are actually cursive transcripts of the real letters between Eliza and Alexander. They're on a type of paper that burns for around 2 minutes and 9 seconds. This is so the flame is noticeable while Eliza is on stage, but extinguishes so she can exit in a blackout at the end of the song. The letters between Angelica Schuyler Church and Alexander Hamilton remained, and while they weren't romantically infatuated with each other, as the show suggests, they were close and wrote to each other regularly. Angelica married British-born John Barker Church in 1777 before Hamilton met Eliza in late 1779 or early 1780. We know Angelica was important to the Revolution. She was celebrated in Federalist circles on both sides of the Atlantic. She was close friends with Thomas Jefferson and corresponded with him extensively, and her salon in London was a gathering point for American and European elites. Her relationship with Hamilton was genuinely warm and possibly flirtatious, though historians debate how far that went. She operated at the edges of political power at a time when women had no formal access to it. The Schuyler sisters also did have brothers, a fact that Miranda said he forgot. And the defining moment that seals Alexander's fate, the endorsement of Thomas Jefferson over Aaron Burr, was very real in that Hamilton lobbied the House of Representatives to back Jefferson, but he wasn't the deciding vote. Jefferson didn't win solely because of Hamilton, nor was it a landslide. It also wasn't the so-called endorsement that inspired the Hamilton-Burr duel. According to the National Archives, Burr challenged Hamilton after Hamilton campaigned and allegedly made disparaging remarks against him during Burr's run to become New York's governor in 1804. But this is a movie podcast. I'm not going to forget that, honestly. And I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention the movie part of Hamilton and why it went from a Broadway hit to a movie version, or at least a filmed version of the show. And there's a very simple reason for it. But it's probably not the reason you think. By the summer of 2016, Hamilton was a massive Broadway hit, breaking the record for Tony nominations and pulling in more than $2 million a week. But the relentless pace of 8 performances a week was taking its toll. And in June, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Philippa Sue, Leslie Odom Jr. and most of the other major cast members announced they would be leaving the show the following month. Thomas Kail realised that the original cast leaving the show was a catalyst to preserve them in these roles. So he decided to shoot them over 3 dates between the 26th and the 28th of June 2016. Filming featured the majority of the original Broadway cast, minus ensemble members Betsy Struxness and Emmy Raver Lampman, who departed in March and April 2016, respectively. Their roles are performed by Hope Easterbrook and Elizabeth Judd. Jonathan Groff, who departed the role of King George III in April and was replaced by Rory O'Malley, returned to reprise his role for the June shoot. There were no reshoots of the material, there was no going back, and it inspired a certain kind of creativity. The cast also wanted to preserve the original Hamilton cast. The footage shot by Radical Media was originally filmed for a 2016 PBS documentary called Hamilton's America. That quickly changed. Kail and editor Jonah Moran began editing the footage in autumn 2016, editing on and off for 18 months, and developed a rough cut by summer 2018. At that point, however, productions of Hamilton were flourishing around the world. Kail and Miranda didn't want to decrease the value of those productions by releasing a filmed version, so they decided to put it on hold. They literally said, wait for it, wait for it. They still shopped the film around Hollywood at the time, and the reaction was overwhelming from major studios, but they turned everyone down. They said no to every offer to protect the theatrical performances, not rushing to monetize the film. It wasn't until 2019 that they felt ready to move forward. In 2019, Disney CEO Bob Iger personally approached them with interest in acquiring the rights. And what's most interesting here is normally someone like Bob Iger would send an executive to do the negotiations. But he flew from California to New York and personally met with them, promising to do the film real justice. A deal was negotiated between Endeavour Content and Walt Disney Pictures president Sean Bailey, and the show's producers and creators agreed to sell the film rights to Disney for $75 million. Disney successfully outbid multiple competitors, including Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, which Disney had acquired in March 2019, and Netflix, who had all expressed interest in the film rights. The money, although sizable, meant little. For Miranda, it was simple. This would be a live theatrical experience, bringing the original Broadway company of Hamilton to the largest audience possible. Not everyone could afford $500 theatre tickets, the sort of prices Hamilton was commanding on Broadway. Access was the explicit priority here, not prestige, not profit, although of course the profit was nice. Deadline reported the deal as potentially the most expensive single film acquisition in Hollywood history. It's worth adding that Disney paid for the theatrical distribution rights to the filmed Broadway play, not the film rights to the musical itself. Disney owns the movie Hamilton 2020, not Hamilton as a franchise, and those rights were purely for a theatrical release of Hamilton only. But then, 2020 happened. The original plan was a wide global theatrical release on the 15th of October 2021. Bob Iger emailed Thomas Kail and Lin-Manuel Miranda in 2020 to ask if they'd consider renegotiating their deal to allow Hamilton to premiere on Disney+, and the pair responded with a flat no. As the COVID-19 crisis worsened, the team behind Hamilton reconsidered and agreed to the early Disney Plus release, moved to the 3rd of July 2020, a full 15 months ahead of the original planned theatrical date. To accommodate the change, a percentage of the profits were restructured to benefit not just Miranda and the cast, but the institution that first developed the show, the non-profit Public Theatre, where Hamilton was developed. It was released on the 3rd of July to fully benefit from the US's 244th anniversary of independence and the 4th of July weekend. On the weekend of Hamilton's release, the Disney Plus app was downloaded over 266,000 times, a 72% increase from the past 4 weeks total. Analytics provider Samba TV reported that 2.7 million US households streamed Hamilton in its first 10 days on Disney Plus. In August 2020, it was reported that 37.1% of subscribers, about 22 million, had watched the film over its first month. And in November, Variety reported the film was the most watched straight-to-streaming title of 2020 up to that point. Disney announced that Hamilton would receive a theatrical release on the 5th of September 2025 in cinemas across the US, Canada and Puerto Rico, expanding on the Disney Plus version with a special prologue titled Reuniting the Revolution, featuring new interviews with the original cast and creators, reflecting on the show's impact on their lives and careers. And now a word from our sponsors, which is you, if you'd like to be. Thank you for listening to this podcast. It's completely independent, made by me, and relies on listener support. If you're enjoying this episode and the work that I do, and you want to support an indie podcaster, if you have some spare change, you can financially contribute to the upkeep of this podcast. You're under no obligation. This podcast is free and always will be, but there are a couple of ways you can help if you wish to and if you have the means to. You can make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can subscribe to the Patreon to support the show monthly at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon. All money made goes back into this podcast by paying for software subscriptions, website hosting, and new equipment. Huge thank you for your continued support. Now, let's learn some more about this movie and how Keanu Reeves is somehow connected to it. But I guess now is the perfect time to segue into the obligatory Keanu reference of this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I try and link every movie or every stage show, this is the first one, to Keanu Reeves for no reason other than he is the best of men, and probably also the best of wives and best of women too. Now, while Keanu isn't in the musical Hamilton, he made headlines when he was spotted in the audience. Jonathan Groff chose Reeves out of the front row to straddle during his performance at the 2025 Tony Awards, and they'd starred in The Matrix 4 together, and so Groff picked him specifically, and the image of Groff straddling him in his seat is a very funny image. I would highly recommend finding that on the internet. On Rotten Tomatoes, Hamilton has a rating of 98%, with a consensus of look around at how beautifully Hamilton shines beyond Broadway and how marvellously Thomas Kail captures the stage show's infectious energy. Despite speculation to the contrary, on the 6th of July 2020, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences disqualified Hamilton for the 93rd Academy Awards, citing a rule implemented in 1997 that states recorded stage productions are not eligible for consideration. Disney included Hamilton in its awards consideration campaign and submitted the film to every organisation and award guild, regardless of apparent eligibility. Unlike the Academy, the Golden Globe Awards and the SAG Awards have no specific restrictions against film theatre and thus recognise the film. Hamilton was nominated for 2 Golden Globe Awards for Best Motion Picture Musical or Comedy and Best Actor Musical or Comedy for Lin-Manuel Miranda. The movie lost to Borat's subsequent movie film, and Miranda lost to Sacha Baron Cohen. Daveed Diggs was nominated for a SAG Award for Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Television Movie or Limited Series. He would lose to Mark Ruffalo for I Know This Much Is True. Hamilton was also nominated for 9 Primetime Emmys, winning Outstanding Variety Special pre-recorded, and it was nominated for 3 Primetime Creative Arts Emmys, winning for Outstanding Technical Direction and Camera Work for a Special. 250 years ago, immigrants created America. 250 years sounds like a long time, but it's actually not. The United States at 250 is younger than many of the world's universities, younger than the construction of St. Paul's Cathedral. Rome was a republic for 500 years before it became an empire. China's imperial history spans millennia. Even within the Americas, indigenous civilizations predate the Republic by thousands of years, a fact the anniversary celebrations largely struggle to accommodate. And yet, in 250 years, the United States has produced the world's dominant economy, military and cultural export machine. Hamilton the show is itself a part of that cultural export. Performed in Broadway and the West End, toured globally, streamed in 190 countries on Disney+. The story of a Caribbean immigrant who helped build America is now an American product sold back to the world. It's especially poignant when we look at America 250 years later and see immigrants being vilified just for being immigrants. That's what happens when you have a president who cares more about his own self-interests over the best interests of the nation he's supposed to be serving. You could argue that America has come a long way in 250 years, but it's also regressed over recent years. And the 250th anniversary celebrations reflect the partisan nature of America today. Less about the 250 years of the country's independence and more about placating one man's desire to have a blue pool and watch grown men get sweaty in a ring. The world was wide enough for Hamilton's story once, and whether it is still depends entirely on who tells your story and who gets to be in the room where it happens. Hamilton was scheduled to run at the Kennedy Center from the 3rd of March to the 26th of April 2026 as part of the center's celebration of the 250th anniversary. Donald Trump fired the center's president, replaced the board of trustees and named himself chairman, and the newly appointed Trump board renamed it the Trump Kennedy Center. In response, Miranda and lead producer Jeffrey Seller announced that Hamilton would not perform. Miranda said in response, quote, "This latest action by Trump means it's not the Kennedy Center as we knew it. The Kennedy Center was not created in this spirit, and we're not going to be a part of it while it is the Trump Kennedy Center," unquote. A court has since ordered it cannot be named after Donald Trump, and it is now back to the Kennedy Center. But Hamilton, a story about the founding of America and the celebration of immigrant exceptionalism, isn't in it. I chose Hamilton for this episode on purpose. This was no accident. It was the only time I could legitimately get away with talking about a movie, about a stage show, and it's the only time I can't include a single cast-performed clip because music from a recorded cast album is a guaranteed copyright strike. I've tried to get round it as best I can. There's an irony about Hamilton, the stage show, how it focuses on a penniless orphan's opportunities to succeed, and yet you had to have plenty of disposable income to buy even the cheapest tickets. That's why the Disney Plus release was so important to its visibility. Suddenly those who don't have a dollar to their name can see it. Having a theatrical performance like this made available to the majority of people is a great thing. But to talk about Hamilton is to talk about its many, many positives. It is musically and lyrically incredibly well made. The cast is phenomenally talented. How they all memorise the complex raps and songs over the runtime is incredible. And it gives a good rounded history of the creation of the United States, what that took and what it cost. And that fundamentally, this was a young, scrappy and hungry country full of opportunists, mostly immigrants wanting a better life. Hamilton's father, James Hamilton, was the fourth son of the Laird of Grange and was of Scottish descent. His mother, Rachel Fawcett, was of French, Huguenot and English descent. Alexander Hamilton may not have been a person of colour in real life, despite some speculation to the contrary, due to his illegitimate birth, but there are rumours that likely stem from the, quote, one-drop rule, which was a racial classification from the 20th century, that any African ancestry, even generations back, meant a person was considered black. But this classification didn't exist in 18th century America, so Hamilton is considered to be a white immigrant, born in the West Indies. And immigrants, they get the job done. The founding fathers, the leaders, the commanders, the high-class citizens were all white men, but the story of America's founding belongs to everyone and not just the white men who were historically in power. In the late 18th century, women also had very few rights. They truly did live in a world where their only job was to marry rich. But Alexander Hamilton died when he was either 47 or 49, as I said, because his birth date was disputed. So Eliza and Angelica were essentially the ones who told his story. His many accomplishments would not be in the history books if not for the important women in his life. Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton was an early American philanthropist. She co-founded the Orphan Asylum Society in 1806. The New York Orphan Asylum Society continues to exist as a social service agency for children, today called Graham Windham. Despite his infidelities, she defended her late husband against his critics in a variety of ways following his death, including by supporting his claim of authorship of George Washington's farewell address and by requesting an apology from James Monroe over his accusations of financial improprieties. She reorganised all of his letters, papers and writings with the help of her son, John Church Hamilton, and persevered through many setbacks in getting his biography published. With his mother's help, John C. Hamilton would go on to publish History of the Republic of the United States of America as traced in the writings of Alexander Hamilton and his contemporaries. That's a mouthful. History of the Republic would set the bar for multiple future biographies of Alexander Hamilton that were written over time. In June 1848, when Eliza was in her 90s, she sought to persuade the US Congress to purchase and publish her late husband's works. That August, her request was granted, and Congress bought and published Alexander's works, adding them to the Library of Congress. Along with ensuring that his works were maintained and stored by the federal government, she remained dedicated to charity work. After moving to Washington, D.C., she helped former First Ladies Dolly Madison and Louisa Adams raise money to build the Washington Monument. Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton died in 1854 at the age of 97. She outlived her husband by 50 years and also outlived all but one of her siblings. I don't know if you've realised, but I'm not American. But Hamilton makes me think about what it must be like to be American, and more importantly, what it means. The anti-racist protests for Black Lives Matter proved that America, but not just America, has a long way to go to truly eradicate racism. Alexander Hamilton, as an immigrant, believed in his own voice and his own words and was given a platform by which to speak. Today's immigrants may have more representation in power, but their fate remains unclear, especially when you can be arrested now for just being the wrong colour, even if you're an American citizen or not. But even the British representation we get speaks to the power and politics associated with colonialism and what happens when you're just a king whose favourite colony decides to up and leave. Everyone shines in this musical, but I adore Daveed Diggs as Jefferson, Philippa Sue as Eliza and Renee Elise Goldsberry as Angelica. Side note, if you haven't seen Girls 5 ever, it's on Netflix. That series is so much fun and Goldsberry is brilliant in it. You can love something and critique it. It can be artistically brilliant and problematic. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Hamilton the show, much like Hamilton the man, was a product of his time, of capitalism, of racism, of misogyny. Hamilton the show, much like Hamilton the man, was a revolution and a revelation. There are shades of grey and subtle nuances. I've seen many a discussion thread that suggests the show should never have been made, as well as seeing others state it's the greatest show ever produced. Both opinions matter when we're talking about a man who did much to create the USA of today, as well as being a man who was problematic and lived during problematic times. And so, in a podcast episode all about the history and legacy of Hamilton, it's not just the legacy of the 2020 movie or the 2016 Broadway spectacle, but the legacy of Hamilton the man and the legacy of the United States of America. The country is at a particular political point of no return in many ways, with the midterm elections looming, and 250 years of a country that, at one point, literally was the dream of many immigrants. It's slowly but surely becoming a nightmare if you're black or brown, if you're LGBTQ, if you're a woman who wants autonomy over her body. Against today's backdrop, the 250th celebrations come with the normalising of white supremacist rhetoric, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, and the threat of removing birthright citizenship. So, to America, if history is written by the victor, 250 years after the Declaration of Independence. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story? Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on Hamilton, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast. Next episode, from the 250th anniversary of independence in the US to the 350th episode of this podcast. Damn, that went quickly. Help me, listeners. You're my only hope. In a couple of weeks. Thank you for listening to Verbal Diorama, a totally free and independent podcast that relies on listener support. If you want to show your support in multiple different ways, you could leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. You could tell your friends and family about this podcast, or you could find me and follow me on social media and you can share the podcast that way. I am at Verbal Diorama across social media, where you can share posts, like posts, comment on posts. It all helps really to get the word out there, to hopefully get other people to know this podcast and know the recent episodes that I've put out. I genuinely love doing this podcast, and anything you could do to help would be so appreciated. A huge thank you to the incredibly generous patrons of this podcast. I could not do what I do without their support. To Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Ian, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, Zoe, Kev, Danny, Stu, Brett, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, Philip, Adam, Elaine, Aaron and Steve. Please consider joining them and supporting this podcast on Patreon if you have the means to. If you want to get in touch, you can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can also go to verbaldiorama.com and you can fill out the contact form. You could say hello, you can give feedback, or you can give suggestions as well. I would genuinely love to hear from you. You can also DM me on social media as well, if that's an option available to you. I love to hear from people and I always try to respond as quickly as possible. Thanks again for listening, and thanks for supporting independent podcasting. It means more to us than you know. And finally, happy 250th year of independence, United States of America. From me and from my cats, Evie. Bye.